Well, today is Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. I'm Brittany Noble, and here's what's coming up on the breakdown. Today, the world has lost a civil rights icon, prominent Black leader Jesse Jackson. We will honor the longtime activist, Baptist minister, and two-time presidential candidate in today's show. We'll have guests who will join us to speak on his legacy. Well, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., the longtime civil rights activist, has died at the age of 84. He was a Baptist minister, politician, and protege of Martin Luther King Jr. Jackson was at the motel in Memphis, Tennessee, when King was assassinated back in 1968. Though that tragedy shaped him, it did not stop his fight for equal rights. Jackson went on to start the People United to Save Humanity, PUSH, back in 1971. PUSH worked to improve economic conditions of Black communities. In 1984, he launched a presidential campaign challenging Ronald Reagan. He finished third for the Democratic nomination. Jackson founded the National Rainbow Coalition in 1984 during his first campaign. PUSH and Rainbow Coalition merged in 1996. The organization advocated for social programs, voting rights, and affirmative action. Jackson put in his second presidential bid back in 1988. From 1990 to 1996, he served as a shadow senator in Washington, D.C. Jackson was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2017 and hospitalized with COVID back in 2021. The cause of his death has not officially been released just yet. Jackson is survived by his wife and his 6 children. Well, today we remember Jackson for the tireless work he put in to build community and change. He stood with Bishop William Barber II a few years ago in a crowd full of people comparing the difference to movements back then to now. Just take a listen.
I was glad to be on the summer march in 1965 and the summer march last week between Georgetown and Austin. The difference between now and then is that we were moral independence party. We lost the vote. They couldn't run the Nixon. Johnson was our salvation in that march. Came to our rescue. Took the heat. First penny gave to Edward Nixon, Republican. Second he gave to Dr. King. We crossed party lines to make real sense. One thing I know now is that we're not the integral part. We're the base to black and brown people.
Black and brown people.
The base. The party.
Of the party.
Not the bottom.
Not the bottom.
Foundation.
Foundation.
As long as we end up, that's where you start from. The reason why Ms. Pelosi should be here today, Schumer should be here today, and Biden should be here today.
All right.
Because if we lose, they lose.
That's right. That's right.
Agreed. We lose.
We lose.
Democracy loses.
Democracy.
We lose. Democrats lose. We lose. The nation loses. Honor. Credibility. In the world.
Well, joining me now, we have Brandon Pope. He is a Black journalist and the host of WBEZ's podcast, Making Jesse Jackson, which explored Reverend Jackson's life, rise, influence, and controversies. Brandon, we want to thank you for joining us again on The Breakdown.
Hey, good to be here, Brittany, on a sad occasion.
Yes, indeed. You spent significant time researching Reverend Jackson's story through Making Jesse Jackson. When you heard that he had passed, what was your immediate reaction?
Immediate sadness. We had, as a Chicago community, a great friend in the Reverend Jesse Jackson. He was a consistent staple here in Chicago, just like he was across the country, but truly a Chicago icon and a person who fought for every Black person in the city of Chicago, especially Black journalists, especially Black storytellers. He made sure to make time for the Black press and young Black journalists like me. And he was always dropping words of encouragement and words of inspiration. You know, one of his favorite things to say was, stay with the Eagles and not with the snakes, meaning,
Mm.
keep above the fray, keep your head high, keep your spirits high. That was always his mentality in everything he did, whether it was fighting for us with economic boycotts, whether it was feeding our communities, whether it was being that bridge between civil rights eras and civil rights generations. Jesse Jackson was a faithful servant, a faithful friend, and a faithful fighter for liberation and civil rights, not just in Chicago, but throughout the entire country and the world.
Brandon, in your podcast, you explore his relationship to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement's inner circles. What did your reporting reveal about how Jackson was able to position himself?
Yeah, one thing we explored was the contrasting narratives and accounts of their relationship. But one thing was very clear: Dr. King relied on the Reverend Jesse Jackson heavily when it came to major operations through the Midwest and around the country. But he really was his connection to the Midwest. Operation Breadbasket was his economic development arm through that Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And that's really where Jesse Jackson took ownership here to really improve the economic lives of Black Americans and make them better by pushing companies to hire more Black and minority executives, work more with Black suppliers. It was big on inner city education programs and helping young people find jobs. And from that moment on, Jesse Jackson continued that work in different ways, and in some ways making it bigger and bigger and taking it to bigger corporations as he went on, from the Don't Choke on Coke campaign to the Sears campaign, all the way now to modern day with Rainbow Push being involved in the Target boycotts. Using that economic arm was a key weapon he learned from Dr. King, and something he utilized so much through his service over the decades.
I think that one of the more fascinating parts of your podcast is how you're able to show Jackson as a preacher, but then also as a political force. How was he able to blend the two together?
Wow, I tell you what we know for sure about the Black church is it makes you a really good orator, especially if you get up there on the pulpit. And Jesse Jackson was a man who had a brilliant way with words and was able to bring that into the mainstream and into major political discourse. This is a man who really, is the trailblazer for so many Black politicians and elected officials. You could argue every Black elected official stands on Jesse Jackson's shoulders and that brilliant campaign in the 80s for president, right? His quick sloganeering, his ability to create chants that were resonating with people, that had a great rhyme scheme, but also be able to connect to the youth, connect to older generations. The man just had a way of connecting people that was deeply rooted in his Christian faith, deeply rooted in his church background, deeply rooted in his upbringing in Greenville, South Carolina, where he actually started out his whole civil rights career with a sit-in at his local library as part of the Greenville 8, a group we don't really talk about as large as some of the other sit-in protests, but that was his way of starting that life of being a change maker, right? And so the thorough line there, seeing how he led his church life, seeing how he blended that with that political power life, and blending the two to become really a power broker in both. And even just the name Push, going from save to serve in that S, right? Says a lot about what he felt like the role of faith and power in politics really was.
Brandon, after reporting the series, what would you say is the most misunderstood part of Jesse Jackson's legacy?
I think the most misunderstood part about Jesse Jackson's legacy, this was an ordinary man. I guess that's the big thing, right? I think it's easy for us to lionize and kind of Santa Claus our historical figures in a sense. I think that does them a disservice. The Reverend Jesse Jackson was a father. He was a friend. He was a flawed man. He was an imperfect man. But he was staunch in his belief for economic opportunity for all people. He was staunch in his belief that, if multiple generations and races come together and build coalitions like that famous Rainbow Coalition, that we as a people together can have progress. So, I'm sure you're going to see messaging from right-wing sources and people who are just really in bad faith, who are going to say something really vile or something really mean-spirited about the Reverend Jesse Jackson. It's just important to remember he was a unifier, not a divider. He was a man who, was unapologetic about his love for Black people, was also unapologetic about his love for the American people and America overall. He was a radical figure for justice. And I hope that we take this moment. I was blessed to have known the Reverend Jesse Jackson and have great conversations with him. It's important that we hold on to our elders, listen to them, talk to them, hear their stories now, so that we can take those lessons with us going forward, because we still have so many fights ahead of us.
And Brandon, tell us a little bit more about some of those conversations that you had with him.
Look, the great Reverend Jesse Jackson, anyone who's a Chicago journalist or reporter who has had the opportunity to speak with the Reverend Jesse Jackson understands how much reverence he has and respect he has for what we do. And he made that very clear from the first time I met him. I was a young reporter in the city, 25 years old. I got to meet this man, and of course, I'm intimidated. I'm nervous. I'm shaking, right? This is an icon, a giant. He grabbed my hand warmly and firmly and said, "I am so honored to be here with you." And that right there shook me. You're honored to be with me? A 25-year-old, fresh-eyed journalist of the city of Chicago, a blip on the radar, but I was no blip to him, and nobody really was. It just really spoke to who he was as a person, right? And, we had a lot of fun chats, and obviously, as he got older, it was, much harder to have conversations with him as his condition worsened. But you could see it in the eyes when you saw him, right? That warmth, that spark, that life, the love he has for his people. It's exuberant, it's infectious, and it's going to be missed.
Brandon Pope, journalist and host of WBEZ's podcast, Making Jesse Jackson. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Breakdown and telling us about your relationship with Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Brandon Pope, thank you. We will be back with much more on the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Stay with us. You're watching The Breakdown.
They said the quiet part out loud. Black votes are a threat, so they erased them. After the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, Republican legislatures moved fast. New voter ID laws, polling place shutdowns, purges of black voters from the rolls. Trump's Justice Department didn't stop it, they joined in. In 2018, his DOJ backed Ohio's voter purge system, a scheme that disproportionately erased black voters. Their goal, erase black votes and political power. Yeah, that happened. These are the kinds of stories that we cover every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Subscribe on YouTube and download the Black Star Network app. Support fact-based independent journalism that centers African Americans and the issues that matter to our community.
If in this country right now, you have people get up in the morning and the only thing they can think about is how many people they can hurt, and they got the power, that's the time for mourning.
For better or worse, what makes America special, it's that legal system that's supposed to protect minorities from the tyranny of the majority.
We are at a point of a moral emergency. We must raise a voice of outrage. We must raise a voice of compassion. and we must raise a voice of unity.
We are not in a crisis of party versus party. We are in a crisis of civilization, a human rights crisis, and a crisis of democracy itself. And guess what? You've been chosen to make sure that those that would destroy, those that would hate, don't have the final say, and they don't ultimately win.
What's happening? This is your man, Motown recording artist Kim. You are watching the Black Star Network.
Presidents of the United States of America.
Well, today the nation is mourning the loss of civil rights icon Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., a historic leader who helped reshape Black political power in America and spent decades fighting for justice. And to put his legacy into real perspective, we're now joined by someone who has covered Reverend Jackson's impact for decades, journalist and curator of the Black Star Network, Roland Martin. Thank you for joining us on The Breakdown today.
Glad to be here. I heard some of the previous conversation, and one of the things that was said is that Reverend Jackson learned the issue of economic rights from Dr. King. First of all, folks need to understand the history of Operation Breadbasket. It was Reverend Leon Sullivan out of Philadelphia who introduced the idea of how they boycotted businesses to Dr. King. Dr. King then said, hey, come present to the SCLC. They did so. They renamed it Operation Breadbasket and then put Reverend Jackson over that in Chicago. And it was that Operation Breadbasket that created tremendous economic opportunities for Black businesses in Chicago. Martin Depp has a phenomenal book on that, on Operation Breadbasket from 1966 to 1971. Now, people also have to understand is that when you think about these expos that happen all across the country, well, that actually came out of Operation Breadbasket. We talk about Essence Music Festival being the largest festival today, some 400,000 people who go to New Orleans, but they had more than 800,000 people who were going through the festival there, the expo there in Chicago. Iconic figures like Bill Cosby, Aretha Franklin, Jackson 5 would perform there. And so Reverend Jackson, his reach was undeniable. You talk about, you name it. If you were a prominent singer, actor, you knew Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr. And understand that career going from North Carolina A&T, which he actually transferred from another particular school, was starting quarterback at North Carolina A&T, going from that to being an aide to Dr. King, to Operation Breadbasket, that morphed into Push, that morphed into Rainbow Push. Then you go through the 70s, where he was sitting here involved in so many different organizing. And when he left South Carolina, he left a letter in his hand. He often told this story where, and he was, when he looking for a job in Chicago. And so Mayor Daley, who was the boss of Chicago, said, oh, there was a job for Reverend Jackson, maybe working a toll booth. But it was John H. Johnson at Ebony Magazine who gave Reverend Jackson a job selling subscriptions. He saw something different in Reverend Jackson than what Mayor Daley did. And that's one of the reasons why when Reverend began to build Push through the 70s, Listen, Reverend Jackson was ubiquitous. He was in Jet magazine almost every week doing something. So he became, in essence, the president of Black America as a result of that coverage in Ebony and Jet magazine. And then, of course, we get to the 1980s. And then all of a sudden, Lou Palmer and others were talking about the need for a black mayor. And so they would talk about different figures. And they said, hey, how about Representative Harold Washington, who was in Congress? And he decides to run for mayor. He tells them, y'all got to do several different things. You do these things and I'll run. Well, he was shocked they actually did it. And so now what was interesting, because Reverend Jackson, a lot of white folks in Chicago saw him in a totally different way. They were like, hey, we got to get Jesse out of town while we're trying to elect Harold Washington. And so while Chicago was yelling, run, Harold, run, other folks are like, what about run, Jesse, run? So Washington wins the mayoral election in 83. That then, the next phase was Reverend Jackson run for president, 1984. And when he runs in 84, what people don't understand is when you talk about the issues being discussed, he was talking about stuff on the debate stage the other white candidates were not touching. He was talking about poverty. He was talking about farmers in Iowa. He stayed in public housing. He stayed in the homes of folk as he was running. He was talking about apartheid racism in South Africa. He was talking about LGBTQ. He was talking about the disabled. When you look at the agenda, in fact, Reverend Jackson was so influential in that run in 84 when he gave the speech you're showing right now in San Francisco, and I'm double checking. Nope, this might be the speech in Chicago. I can't remember. But when he gave the speech, yeah, that was in 84. He gave the speech in San Francisco in 84 that actually led to the centrist, or some say center-right coalition called the DOC, the Democratic Leadership Council. Bill Clinton came out of that. So the Democratic Party was so scared of Reverend Jackson's message, they said, oh, we'll never be able to get anybody elected, that the DOC is created just as he is giving that speech in San Francisco. 4 years later, Dukakis runs. 4 years later, Bill Clinton runs as a DOCer, but it was Reverend Jackson they were scared of. Now, what's crazy is if you go forward 15, 20 years, the very issue that Reverend Jackson was championing became cornerstones of the Democratic Party. So then you go to 88. He runs, comes in second to Michael Dukakis. They recognize that, wait a minute, Reverend Jackson has all this enthusiasm, all the support. Why is it wasn't reflected in the voting populace? So what then happens? They change the rules. Now, why is that important? The Democrats for the longest had winner take all. So you win the state, you win all the delegates. Doesn't matter how many other votes you got. Reverend Jackson with Ron Brown, who became chair of the Democratic National Committee, late Dr. Ron Walters, they then changed the rules. Why is that important? If they did not do in 1988, there is no President Barack Obama. If you go to 2008, Hillary Clinton actually wins the large states. Hillary Clinton won Pennsylvania. She won Ohio. She won Texas. She won California. So had the rules been in place in 2008 that were in 88, there is no President Barack Obama. So that's political. But the economic, the education, the runs in 84 and 88, he had coattails, meaning there were black people all across the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas, that were elected to office, sheriffs, city councils, county commissioners, school boards, state reps, state senators, because Reverend Jackson ran. So Run, Jesse, Run actually morphed into Run, Black America, Run. And so I think too many of us really underestimate the influence, and even beyond the influence of that. Reverend Jackson was massive in pop culture, appearing on Sesame Street, appearing on SNL, been a part of many skits, music, movies, documentaries, giving the eulogy at the funeral of Jackie Robinson. I mean, we can go on and on and on This is a towering, iconic figure, and his role, his impact cannot in any way be minimized.
Well, Roland, the reactions are coming in, and I want to share some of them with you. Reverend Al Sharpton just put this out on X this morning. He says, "My mentor, Reverend Jesse Jackson, has passed. I just pray with his family by phone. He was a consequential and transformative leader who changed this nation and the world. He shaped public policy and changed laws. He kept the dream alive and taught young children from broken homes like me that we don't have broken spirits." Also, Attorney Ben Crump has responded saying, "We are heartbroken by the passing of Jesse Jackson, a towering icon of the civil rights movement and a dear friend. From marching with Martin Luther King Jr. to founding the Rainbow Push Coalition and running historic presidential campaigns, Reverend Jackson never stopped pushing America to live up to its promise. He empowered millions to declare, 'I am somebody,' and expanded the path for leaders of color in politics and public life." Senator Joyce Beatty said this: "Today, our nation mourns the loss of Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr., a towering figure in the fight for justice, voting rights, and human dignity. Reverend Jackson was a moral voice for the voiceless, a fearless advocate for the poor and marginalized, and a champion for civil and human rights here at home and around the world. I've been honored to know him personally, to walk beside him, to march with him, and to stand with him in continuing struggle for justice. From my earliest years to the night he stood by me during my first election to Congress and throughout the years since, Jesse was a great friend and advisor who will always remain in my heart. Even in his health struggles, his presence continued to remind us of his unshakable belief that democracy thrives when people show up and speak up and exercise their power. Reverend Jackson helped carry the civil rights movement into the modern era, showing that racial justice, economic justice, voting rights, and representation are inseparable. Through Operation Breadbasket, Operation Push, and the Rainbow Push Coalition, he built lasting institutions that expanded community services, economic empowerment, and political mobilization. His presidential campaigns and decades of grassroots activism strengthened civic engagement, deepened Black political power, and proved that a Black candidate could compete on the national stage. His distinguished life of activism was recognized with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2000. Reverend Jackson's leadership shaped movements, his courage opened doors, his voice stirred the conscience of the nation. He taught us to lift our voices and to keep hope alive. Today, we honor him by carrying his charge forward. We will keep marching, we will keep fighting, and we will keep hope alive." Well, Senator...
It's no surprise when you talk about all these different tributes. And again, I think people have to understand. I just saw something Isaiah Thomas put out, and so many people. What people have to recognize is that you can be watching the news, and Reverend Jackson may have been with a Black family who lost a child to police violence in the morning, and then by that evening or night, he was at the Vatican with the Pope. He may have been with Boris Yeltsin and meeting somewhere. People also don't understand. Reverend Jackson, when he traveled the world, he was literally treated like a head of state. That's how he was received around the world when he traveled. And in fact, Allison Payne was an anchor. Allison Payne was an anchor at WGN. And they happened to be in Israel, and something happened in Israel, but they were detained, and there was some issues. There was some trouble. Allison Payne didn't say, "Hey, we need to call the State Department." Allison Payne didn't say, "Man, we need to reach the White House." She called Reverend Jackson, and within an hour, Reverend Jackson was on the phone with the leader of Israel, and they were out of trouble. I always said, I would often on my WVON radio show would tell people that if you ever got in trouble, I would say, if you got in trouble, who would you call? And folks would say, "Oh, I would call Minister Farrakhan. I would call Johnny Cochran. I would tell them, nope, it's going to be hard for you to reach him." The reality is, you were one person removed from Reverend Jackson. If you pick the phone up and call Rainbow Push and say, Reverend Jackson, please, they would transfer you to his office. And so his chief of staff, the late John Mitchell, or his other secretary would answer the call. And you were literally one person removed. You might, in a matter of seconds or minutes, say, please hold for Reverend Jackson. You might get a call back and it would be, Roland, hold on, I have Reverend Jackson. That's literally how you can reach him. So when we talk about the prisoners that Reverend Jackson was able to bring back, people who were kidnapped overseas, when you had that naval officer who was kidnapped in Syria, Reverend Jackson took a delegation, a black delegation there to bring him back home. President Ronald Reagan had to show respect to Reverend Jackson for bringing him home. And so we're talking about a level of influence that is unmatched. When we talk about prominent, not Black American figures, prominent American figures in the second half of the 20th century, there's without a doubt Reverend Jackson is on that list, and not at the bottom of that list. He's at the top of that list in terms of level of influence. I know of businesses that have been saved because he called CEOs and said not taking their contracts. I mean, I know personally these things. I saw African Americans who understood and appreciated work of Reverend Jackson show up to Rainbow Push every Saturday with their donation check to Rainbow Push because they understood they had to give back to the movement. And so Reverend would travel around this country and he would go, and I'm telling you right now, he would drop into cities. And when he gets to the airport, police escorts are there. There was no preacher he could not call. There was no politician he could not call. And when people got in trouble, if water issues, fire, issues with police, you name it, he was called and he was there. And so I don't care what age you are, we have to laud our luminaries, the folk who stand with us. That's one of the reasons why we're going to have a 3-hour tribute tonight, the entire show tonight. We're opening the phone lines as well for folks to share their thoughts and reflections about Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. We've got individuals who knew him, who worked with him, worked alongside of him, who are going to be joining us. I dare say, as I think back, when I think back to the funeral of Congressman John Lewis, that was not called a state funeral. I dare say it was an African-American state funeral. And there's no doubt in my mind, it's exactly how we will funeralize in the homegoing Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. And if anybody wants to truly, if you want to say, well, what can I read? What can I find that really encapsulate Reverend Jackson? Play the last 7 minutes, or go listen to the last 7 minutes of his speech at the 1988 Democratic National Convention. I listened to that speech. I have it on my phone. I listened to that speech multiple times a year, moved to tears every single time. That last 7 minutes really speaks to who he was and why he did what he did. And so that's why we are going to have a big celebration of him tonight, beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern on Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network.
Roland, before we let you go, I just want to ask, how has Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. inspired your work personally?
Well, we knew each other, and so he would often call. I mean, I've got, and Reverend would, whatever was on his mind. There are numerous photos I have where my ear is next to him, especially in later years because of Parkinson's. But Reverend Jack, people don't understand. Reverend Jackson had a brilliant mind. I mean, the ability to remember details and facts and figures in public policy, absolutely unmatched. And again, I think part of the problem. I think part of the problem for a lot of us is that Reverend Jackson was omnipresent, meaning he was everywhere. So the problem is, and I would always get upset actually when there would be an event and he would be in the room and it'll be like, oh, Reverend Jackson here. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And I would literally stop if I spoke, or if I was the MC, or if I was the keynote speaker, or if I was even getting an award. I would stop. I would say, no. That man cannot be in the room, and that's our greeting. And I would force people to stop the program, to properly applaud and thank him for what he did.
Yeah.
When a person is so familiar, that's what we do. It's like, oh, that's so and so. No. That their familiarity with us, being omnipresent, being always showing up somewhere, does not negate who they really are and the presence that they had. I often say this here. Some people are present. Some people have presence. He had presence. He was present, and he had presence. And even when, a lot of people were critical of him for comments made about President Barack Obama when they were running, a lot of people, a lot of Black people, a lot of media people refused to have him on their shows. He was basically ostracized. He was blackballed. I remember he went after Silicon Valley, 2015. Folks wouldn't talk to him. I had him on my TV One show constantly. I could not, I didn't care if people, and I criticized him for what he said, but I made clear that cannot negate what he had done and what he was still doing. And I'll end it with this, and I said this on the Ricky Smiley show. I need people to understand that he didn't just stop. In November, and I'm not going to drop the video, so y'all check group me for this. So I want y'all to show this. Give me 1 second. Courtney or Keenan, I want you to grab group me, and then I want you to pull up this photo. So in November, we got word that Reverend Jackson was days away from passing. I was in Bermuda at the Butterfield Bermuda Championship, and I'm gonna go back. I want to give the date. My birthday was November 14th. I was communicating with Shelly Davis, Yusef Jackson, his son, and they were like, "You need to come see Reverend." So I changed my plans. I came back much earlier on the 15th. I flew home to DC. The next day, I flew out first thing in the morning to Chicago on the 16th and went straight to the hospital. People have been coming and going. And so I sat bedside with Reverend Jackson, holding his hand, talking to him. And as we're sitting there, the others in the room, and we're talking about the Target boycott and protest, whatever. Then Reverend Jackson goes, he says, Coke. Now, mind you, he had not eaten or drinking. They were his throat was extremely parched. And they only wanted him drinking water. He didn't want water. He wanted Coke. So Yusef was like, just get a man Coke. Just get a man Coke. Just get a man Coke. So he's drinking Coke. And we're talking just about stuff. And then Reverend begins to talk. Now, mind you, it was very difficult for him to talk because of Parkinson's. It was very difficult and mind you, remember, his brain is still functioning. So you literally see him processing. But because of the Parkinson's, it just could not get it out. And so we're hearing every fifth word. And Reverend James Meeks is sitting right there. And Yusef was like, Daddy, what are you saying? We can't understand you. And Meeks is like, hold on. He said, I know exactly where he's going. And he starts saying preachers. He says Friday. He says plan. He says feeding the hungry. He starts talking about voting. Here's this man, body is shutting down, beginning the transition to become an ancestor. And he was still fixated on doing some work. So when y'all had that photo, y'all can pull it up. That was from that day, November 16th. And he's literally sitting there, and people are coming and going. So I step out, and I go to the family room, and we're all there talking. And they say, Roland, Reverend's calling you. So I go back in. We talk, and I come back out. Somebody else come out. I want them to have a chance to sit down, talk to them. I go back to the family room. Hey, Roland, Reverend's calling. So this happened like 5 times. And they start laughing. It's like, you can go ahead and stay in there. Reverend's going to keep calling you. So at one point, his daughter, Jackie, we hugged real tight. And she said, please keep talking to my daddy. That's what's keeping him alive. And what happened was all of these people who were coming by and who were calling, and they were concerned, well, the Reverend's getting tired, so let him rest. But what happened was all of that energy actually revived him. The doctors, so I left that Sunday. Like the next day, the doctors were like, we can't explain what the heck is going on. And absolutely, it was prayer. But what they didn't understand is that all of these people who were coming by, who were calling, who were visiting him, it brought him back to life. And in fact, the crazy thing is, I was just looking at the message. 1 second. Shelly sent on November 24th, Rev is scheduled to be discharged tomorrow to the Clare Retirement Residence, downtown Chicago, not far from Northwestern Hospital, where he's been for the past week. The doctors were like, but it was the people. So here he was in November, still talking about doing the work. And that's what people need to understand, who this man was. And so that's what we're going to celebrate tonight on Roland Martin Unfiltered. These were some photos that Reggie Cunningham took at the CBC swearing in on January 3rd, 2023. There's so many different photos, and of course, my favorite one is it's on my Instagram page at the Tulsa 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the commemoration, where we were right in front of the church, and Reverend walked up, and his head is pressed against my head, and both of us are smiling. So loved him dearly, appreciate his work, and really think back on the special relationship that we had and shared. And absolutely, he will be missed by millions across the world, including me.
Roland, thank you so much for opening up and sharing your relationship with Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Of course, Roland will have a special 3-hour Roland Martin Unfiltered happening tonight, where he will be honoring the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Roland, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
I also, before I let you go, I want to just share this post on X from former President Barack Obama. He says, Michelle and I are deeply saddened to hear about the passing of a true giant, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. We will always be grateful for Jesse's lifetime of service and the friendship our family share. We stood on his shoulders. We send our deepest condolences to the Jackson family and everyone in Chicago and beyond who knew and loved him. And folks, if you like the work that we're doing here at the Black Star Network, understand your support is absolutely critical to what we do. Please support us via Cash App using the Stripe code in the bottom left-hand corner. There it is right there. You can also help us out with credit cards. Please use the same thing. PayPal's are Martin Unfiltered. Venmo's RM Unfiltered. Zelle at RolandSMartin.com. Rolling at RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. If you're old school, that's all right. Please send in checks and money orders payable to Roland Martin Unfiltered, P.O. Box 57196 in Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. Our goal is to raise $1 million by December 31st, and we certainly appreciate your support. That does it for us today on The Breakdown. Again, Roland Martin Unfiltered, that special 3-hour special happening tonight from 6 to 9 Eastern on the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Have a great day.